Hello everyone, Jeff here. So the year of 2020 is drawing to a close, and it's time to take a look at what we've accomplished in 2020 for Antilia. Obviously it's been a stressful and a bit different of a year than usual, but as far as development on Antilia is concerned, it's been quite a remarkable year. We started out the year, it kind of felt like Antilia was in the weeds a bit. Some of the gameplay systems and the tools I'd built really hadn't lived up to what I'd hoped they would do for us. So it was difficult at the beginning of the year to kind of get things turned around and get the project back on track. And if you told me that at the end of the year we would be looking at these incredible pans across the landmass of Antilia, I really wouldn't have believed it. I did not expect that we'd be looking at this at the end of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll drop the camera down here at the character level. We'll do a little tour of Antilia. We'll take a look at some new features. As we do, I'm sure you'll notice some lighting issues and some popping. I'm aware of these things. This is all a work in progress, and I will continue to improve these things. So without any further ado, let's take a look. So let's start off by talking about some of the new rendering features. Now, I've been using the city of Ariel down here as a sort of a test bed. It's by no means fleshed out. I'm just using as a place where I can put a bunch of buildings and a bunch of trees and just see how things perform and kind of tune in that performance, find out what's not performing as well, that sort of thing. So the first thing you'll notice is we have buildings, but also we have distant buildings now. You can actually see the buildings quite far into the distance. And that's based on this new LOD system that I've built into the building structure editors. As we run through this simple market square, you'll notice the buildings switch between their low and high LOD level. And I also want to note that all the buildings are using a real simple procedural algorithm so that they're all unique. They're not just a mesh. That's given us the ability to render these buildings from quite far away, which is important to me because I think when you're flying around as a Saki or you're standing up on the top of a cliff as a tapee, I want the player to be able to look out over an area and see points of interest and become interested in them and go over there and explore them. If all they ever see in the distance is terrain, well, that's not quite as interesting, I don't think. Another thing I've improved render-wise is the water. We've got diffraction back. We've got kind of this water fog, and the watercolors can be edited. So that's all looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the way that's gone. Same with the sky. I've done some work on the sky colors. I think they're looking really good. We've also got distant clouds now. You'll see the clouds up there. And the clouds are actual simulation objects that the server is spawning, moving, and despawning. And eventually I'd like them to be kind of like little miniature storm systems that can kind of move over an area and create their own localized effects like rain and snow. Really excited to work on that more, but it's not really a priority right now. The other obvious one that we've added is the distant trees. And again, the distant trees, they definitely have some lighting issues. I need to add normal maps to the trees to get them to light well. Lately, I find I've changed my development process because I'm juggling more things at once between the world building, the gameplay elements I want to add, and the rendering features. So I'm often taking a character and running around in the world and asking myself, what's the biggest thing that's missing from the scene? What's the biggest eyesore? What can I do that would improve Antilia the most right now? As I've pointed out, there's rough edges on all of these new features, but I'm looking forward to working on them more, improving them, and I can't wait to see how they look in our next video. Next, let's take a look at the state of Antilia's world design, starting with a location familiar to some, the Isle of Kassa. So here are characters running around in the Tangled Lands, and I have to say this is probably my favorite area in Antilia right now. It just has a really cool atmospheric feel, especially late at night or early in the mornings. In fact, I like this area so much, I'm actually considering expanding it a little bit because it just leaves me wanting for a little bit more right now. Now, while I was working on the Antilia landmass, I began to notice that the size and location of the Isle of Kassa wasn't really working very well. Mount Gajoy just seemed to disappear among a bunch of other similarly sized islands in the area, and considering the island's history with the MMO, I felt like something that was really unique had been lost. So I've been reworking the layout of the island a little bit to make better use of space. In fact, everything is kind of wrapped around Mount Gajoy now. I've tried to include as many of the original points of interest as I could, and I'm also throwing in a couple more that were hinted at but never quite realized. Now, as far as the rest of the landmass of Antilia goes, there is a lot of work to do. Most of it is just completely empty. Most of it's using the same grass layer over and over again, the same rock layer over and over again. Some of the texturing, especially over by Alan Fay, doesn't look good at all. I'm going to have to redo that entirely. I'm doing a lot of experiments, and some of them are working out well, some of them not so well. So almost all of this is going to be, it's going to change between what you see here right now and what it ends up being. But, that's just part of the process, and I'm personally really excited. I'm having a ton of fun working with the new tool set. So let's take a look at that next. Let's look at the terrain editor and how I'm using it to create all this. So let's take a quick look at the terrain editor tool, which is what I've been using, of course, to create the Antilia landmass. You may remember another tool we were using for a while, the vector-based Toy Studio landscape tool. That really didn't pan out very well. It was more like programming than it was creative. But this new tool is definitely more like sculpting. It's very creative. If you want to flatten something, you just click on the flatten tool. Here I'm using a bit of a fractal noise tool to just create a little more interest around the island, the shape of the island. Here I'm kind of tuning the shape of things. Like I said, kind of like sculpting. It's all what you see is what you get. I have a few options like this view heights thing that I turn on sometimes to get a better sense of how the terrain is shaped. Here I'm using the erode tool, which is one of my favorite tools. I might even overuse it a little bit, in fact, just because it's like using, with a click, you can drop virtual raindrops on the terrain, and it really helps to make it look a little bit more natural. And like I said, I think I overuse it a little bit, so I'm going to have to dial that back. So here I'm painting in some sand on the terrain. I've got constraints enabled there, maximum height of the altitude, maximum slope, all those kind of things. That really makes it a lot easier to manage painting the terrain, especially when you're just kind of trying to prototype real fast. Doing that by hand would be very time consuming and not very accurate, of course. So here I am painting again, this time with a fractal noise option enabled, which helps add some nice variation. And I'm just going to drop in some trees. I think you get the idea. This tool is just real powerful, real straightforward and easy to use. And I'm just having a ton of fun using it. I can't wait to get back to world building and create some more. Heading into 2021, I will of course continue working on the Antilia landmass, refining areas and adding in more layers of detail. And I will work on those rendering glitches as well. But for the next several months, I really want to put my focus on gameplay features. For the past few years, I've spent a lot of time working on the editor tools and the content pipeline, and I'm happy to say that much of that has really taken a solid functional form now. But what I think Antilia really needs next is more working gameplay systems so that we can resume community testing. I worked on a few gameplay systems in 2020. I made some improvements to the skill grid, took another development pass at the inventory, added containers and the ability to drop and pick up items that are sitting in the world. Now previously I talked about having a fishing alpha, but I don't think that really makes sense anymore. As I look at this amazing landscape, I've been pushing the idea that if we had basic resource gathering and a basic structure editor in place, I think that's a much more interesting place to start than fishing, and we're already so close to having much of those systems in place. Well, that's going to wrap up this update. One last thing I'd like to do is give a big thank you to all of the Patreon backers who supported this project in 2020. I've tried to include everyone for the year here in this list because there's several months this year where development just wasn't in the right place to make a video. Many of the objects and the textures you've been seeing in the video here were made possible by the support of the patrons, and there's much more coming that could not yet be included in the world. If you would like to help support the project, you can do so by visiting www.patreon.com/Antilia. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.